Hello listeners, welcome back to Money Talk with Patrick. I am your host Patrick, trading mentor and creator of TC Trading. So in today's episode, I would like to talk about the disadvantages that millennials have in real estate in comparison to the opportunities that older generations had. It is important to understand how modern economy is affecting new generations, and if you are a millennial or Gen Z, be aware of this and get prepared. I am planning to make other similar episodes to this one, so if you have any topics as suggestions, please email them to support@tctrading.com. If you want to know more about trading or anything I have covered in my past podcast series, you can also use that same email in order to reach me. So hello everyone, I hope that you have been doing great. It's always a pleasure to talk more about things related to the economy, to finances, or even to trading. And now I'm gonna be doing some different series, so you will see that the name of this episode is basically Millennials, that short end of the stick, and there's a very good reason why I'm kind of like doing this mini series, or maybe just an episode every now and then. But probably if you are a millennial or Gen Z, which is the kind of like a newer generation, I bet that you have heard the following, and it comes in the lines like your life is so much easier thanks to technology, and you will hear like, back in my time I had to walk 100 kilometers just to get to school, or I had to support a family all by my own, And the fact is that a lot of people, older people, they tend to talk about like how our lives is easier thanks to technology now. It is a fact that technology makes life easier and more comfortable. That's why we invest in R&D, so that we can get kind of like these luxuries out of technology. But does that really mean that life of younger generation is in fact easier? Now, in economical terms, it is in fact, and this is a fact, and this is what I'm going to be covering more in this episode, but it is a fact that it is more difficult for younger generations, such as millennials or Gen Z, to get the same opportunities than older ones, naming Gen X or baby boomers, right? Now, this goes for real estate, job opportunities, or even starting a business. Of course, in this episode, I'm going to be talking more about real estate, but my aim with this series will be to talk more about the challenges that we are facing as a younger generation and what we can do about it. Now, one thing that I want to tackle is this idea of the complaining culture, right? Because I've heard a lot of people, older people, that say that we only complain and we don't do anything. Now, I don't know about you, but it seems that older generations like boomers and Gen X, they imply really with what I just said, that we only complain and we don't do anything about it. And I'm sure that you will notice this starting from home all the way to education and other areas. If you're home, your parents or your relatives might tell you, hey, why don't you get a job? Why don't you do this? Why don't you get more? If you're in university, even a lot of the times, teachers or academics would tell us like, oh, back in my days we didn't have calculators to do all of this, and again, they imply that you complain about the current situation, even because it was in their set of mind, or in their opinion it was harder before. Now, even though I agree that a lot of people just complain for the sake of complaining and don't do anything at all, it is hard to hear this exact comment from the people who are in power right now. Right? From the people, who are in power in most industries, in politics, where literally everything right now is kind of like going down. It's kind of like it's not the best time to be to be in, right? If you talk about politics, there's extreme division. You have left, you have right, and it's never been so polarized. If you talk about climate change, it's a very fragile situation. You have scientists and you also have politicians saying, kind of like the opposite. You talk about the wealth gap, and it's almost a fact that it's never been as difficult to get a job as it is right now. That job, that wealth gap of people who are starting to work and people who already had opportunities before is huge right now. So While older people complain about us complaining, also remember that what they have done is not an ideal representation of what you should do, or what kind of like an ideal environment is, right? And they can complain about us a lot, but in fact is that they are the ones in power. They are the ones who could really make a change, and they say, hey, you only complain, I don't do anything. Well, guess what? It's, at a certain extent, it's very difficult for someone who's not in power to really do significant changes. Now, I might be deviating a little bit, but I wanted to recall an experience when I was at university. Now, when I was at university, of course, you might know that I studied aerospace engineering, but I remember, I believe it was in my second year, when the university or the directors, they wanted to change the course structure. Okay, and this was 3 weeks after the classes already started. So it was basically just kind of, they were telling us, oh well, you have studied 3 weeks, or you have covered all these topics for, I don't know, 2 or 3 subjects. Guess what, we're gonna change these subjects, and now you have to do these other ones, because your course is gonna be changing. And they did try to be really strict on this, but to be honest, I mean, it was mainly me, but also with kind of like I rally other people, uh, just kind of to complain about it, just kind of being more perseverant, and not be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna take what you tell me, what you give me, and then that's it, I'm just gonna obey in that case. So I was really complaining, and I was really pushing a little bit in this regard, kind of like not only complaining for the sake of complaining and say, no, this is not fair, and that's it. I was trying kind of to promote better options, or kind of like to say, okay, what can we do? Maybe we can choose other subjects, maybe we can have a kind of a tailored experience. It doesn't really matter, like we're covering like different modules, but they are all relevant for engineering, right? And in the end, it actually worked. Me and some friends, we had like a unique degree, to say, because we had different subjects that were not normally included. Like we had ability to choose, and again, this came from the sake of actually kind of complaining and trying to do something about it. Now, going back into the main topic, going back into real estate, the other day I was kind of procrastinating from studying my finance course, or reviewing some of the finance courses that I've done in the past. Now, here, I was studying at that time, and then I was kind of I was getting a little bit bored, so I decided to take a look kind of at the rate of inflation and housing valuation, because that's kind of like the topics that I was covering, and I was like, okay, what does it look like right now? So what I really wanted to know is how cheaper it was to buy a house, discounting the price of inflation. I decided to do this because every time I've brought this topic to other people, specifically to older generations, I've always heard the same. They always say, "Oh, it's just because of inflation. It's the same to buy a house right now that it was in the past." And the fact is that it is not. The data shows otherwise. Now, in order to do this calculation, I use the two web pages to extract the data. I don't mind that this is only the case for the UK, but surely this will apply in general for other countries. Maybe it's not exact percentages, but the trend is gonna be the same. So the first page that I use is the land register data from the government's page, and the Bank of England inflation calculator. Now, check this out, because this is kind of like the crazy thing regarding real estate and the opportunities that I was talking about. So what I did was using data from the year 2000 all the way to 2020. Now, I just grab this data just as an example, because this is probably when Gen X's, were buying homes back then. You're talking about 20 years in the past, or probably if you're a millennial, your parents are about 50, 60. So we're talking about they being kind of like young adults, or entering that 30s territory, where they already have worked a little bit, and they are able to start buying either a house, or buying more property. Now, in terms of housing, average prices started at around 75,000 pounds per home. That's kind of like the average. Of course, it deviates depending on the property, but the average is 75K. Now, I will post this graph on YouTube in case you want to go there and you want to see how it looks like exactly. But you will see that there's kind of like, it's a line that starts from 75K and it's slowly progressing upwards. It only makes a small pivot, kind of like a small dip during that 2008 financial crisis. But despite this small kind of dip in the bigger scenario, or in the bigger perspective of this trend, the trend continues for a price of around 269,000 pounds. Yes, that's 269K. That's kind of like the peak at the end of 2020. Now, this is actually an increase of 358% more or less. Now you might say, oh yes, but there's a lot because of inflation. So what I did, to take that into consideration, so I did measure the average price, meaning the initial 75K, the 75,000 pounds. I measured that and accounted, compounding at the rate of interest, just to neglect kind of like this inflation. So I was comparing the 75K and then compounded with the BOE inflation rate, which yields a result of around 129,100 pounds, basically 129K. Now, if you make a ratio of both numbers, if you divide 129 divided by 269,000, you get a ratio of nearly 0.48. Now, what does this ratio actually mean? Well, this ratio means that the houses back then were almost at the 50% discount without taking into consideration inflation. So getting a house literally was half as expensive as it is right now. And this is, again, already taking into consideration inflation, which is just a crazy number, and you have to take into consideration that there's a lot of reasons why this is a thing. People back then, they had more opportunities, they earned more substantially, again, even taking into consideration inflation, and they were buying multiple properties. Nowadays, it's also a kind of like a huge problem in a lot of cities. You name it, London, you name Vancouver, you name Hong Kong, where a lot of this old money has invested and they have a lot of property. So now if you want to buy new property, it's super expensive. And it's not only super expensive, there are also legislations in certain countries that kind of like prohibit new housing or new construction companies to create more houses and then making the full price, and this is kind of crazy because, again, there was it was so much better to buy houses 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And of course, if you even think about even way more in the past, it was actually even cheaper. Again, there's a lot of reasons why housing valuations are off the roof, which I will not really talk about, very deep in this episode. That might be for another time. But the fact is that economic opportunities are harder to get for new generations. In this episode, I only scratched the surface with housing, but it goes beyond that if you consider the difficulties of getting a job. The fact that we now compete against industry the giants, and also that markets tend to oversaturate very quickly, really kind of like puts us in a disadvantage. In any case, traders and listeners, I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Money Talk with Patrick. As time moves forward, more and more challenges come up. Even though this can sound a bit demotivating, being aware of this will make you be better prepared to tackle future financial situations. If you want to learn how to earn a side income with trading, definitely check out my webpage at www.tctrading.com to learn more. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode. Take care, guys.